Hey everybody! So today we're going to talk some more about the GC, specifically about the GC falling in the different houses. This video isn't, it's not, a bulk of the research is focused on the conjunctions to the GC, the oppositions, the trines, Jupiter retrograde, being involved, other retrograde planets. And while I do think that people that have things like that going on in their chart probably are more in tune with the GC energy, I won't lie about that. I think they probably are. I do think the GC matters in the chart regardless. I think it plays in somehow regardless. Now, before I start this, I want to start out with my disclaimer that I'm literally just fucking with astrology here. I am not a Galactic Center expert, nor am I claiming to be. I have a lot of astrological knowledge, but this is literally one area where I am just fucking with astrology. Just tossing out some ideas, some possibilities, just playing around. So I reserve the right for any and all of this to be wrong later on. It might be, might not be. So, just want to put that out there. Let's also, for a second though, let's talk about how the houses are set up. Now, if you're using whole signs, this won't matter because Sagittarius will be on the cusp of some house from 0 to 29 degrees all the way through. But for anybody that uses anything else, you might have a situation where, okay, you know, like when you pull your chart, you'll have a sign on the house cusp, and then somewhere down the line, the sign will change and it'll turn into another sign. Okay, so if the Galactic Center happens to fall in your chart, obviously it's going to be in Sagittarius, but if it happens, like, okay, like let's say you got Sagittarius on the cusp of the first house. It's at 15 degrees cusp of the first house. And then Capricorn is on the cusp of the second house. Okay, the Galactic Center in this case is going to fall in the house where Sagittarius is on the cusp, meaning Sagittarius energy, nothing is conditioning Sagittarius energy there. It's just able to flow through the house cusp easily. Another example of this would be somebody that, let's say they've got their ascendant at, let's say they've got their first house cusp, their ascendant is at 27 degrees Scorpio, and their second house cusp begins at 29 degrees Sagittarius. That would put the GC in the first house, but it's in a first house that actually has Scorpio on the cusp. I think when you see stuff like that happen, the Galactic Center energy probably isn't as easily felt in a, I don't want to say easy, but in a pure expression kind of way, since that energy, that Sagittarius energy, is being conditioned by Scorpio. Since Scorpio is the actual sign on the house cusp. Whereas on the first example, the person that has first house or whatever, with Sagittarius on the first house cusp or what have you, the Galactic Center then falls in the first house, but there's nothing there conditioning Sagittarius energy, so it's not being conditioned by anything else, so it's able to come through perhaps more like it wants to without having the conditioning. So I do want to mention that I do think that if I do think that makes it easier probably to feel this energy. I also do think that there are certain houses that the GC can fall in, that even if you don't have conjunctions to the GC, oppositions to the GC, Jupiter retrograde, trines, a lot of other retrograde planets. I think there are a few houses that, regardless and even if the person may not know it's the GC, they may not know that it's actually the GC that's doing this, but I do think that the GC kind of falling in, say, like the first house or the fourth house, I do think that it kind of gives the person an amplified understanding of the GC energy, especially if Sagittarius is actually ruling the house cusp there and the GC falls in that house. So we're going to talk about, let's start with the first house. I do think that people that have the GC in the first house, you know, I've talked about the GC being kind of like an out of bounds planet in a way. It's kind of a wild card. It can kind of go the way that it wants to go, do what it wants to do. I do feel like the person might, and there's something kind of Uranian about it. I do feel like there probably is something different about this person, about the way they present themselves, about the way they react to things, about their temperament. There probably is something different, maybe a little bit more Uranian in nature, or there's a Uranian flavor there maybe, in some way. But there's usually something different about the person themselves, and they are probably aware of it. They're probably more aware of it. They may not know that it's like the GC that does this or that has an influence on this, but they are aware of the difference. They probably are aware of the difference. Now, I've also talked about the Galactic Anti-Center. The Galactic Anti-Center, with the person that has the GC in the first house, the Galactic Anti-Center is going to be in the 7th house. Now, the Galactic Anti-Center, I've talked about the Galactic Anti-Center as perhaps being an area where we are blinded or where we can't see clearly. I think that is probably the case, regardless of if you have anything conjunct the GC or conjunct the Anti-Center. So for the person with the Galactic Center in the first house, they might have a different kind of understanding about themselves, and it might actually be pretty good. But the 7th house might be a real blind spot for them, which is one-on-one relationships, close relationships, even personal balance, because balance plays into the 7th house as well. But I might say that close relationships, one-on-one close relationships, might be a real blind spot for these people. They might be blinded by them. They might not see them clearly. There might be something going on with the 7th house. Even if they have a very different yet clear understanding of themselves, there might be something blinding about one-on-one relationships. Blinding, or that they don't see clearly. Now, you've got the 2nd house. Let's say you've got the 2nd house. So you got the GC in the 2nd house. So that deals with values and self-value, self-worth, money, resources, all those kinds of things. So let's say that you have the GC in the 2nd house. Perhaps you have a different kind of relationship with money. Perhaps you have a different kind of relationship with your values, with your own self-value even, with your resources. You might understand them. You might understand them well in a weird way. Usually something kind of different or strange, I would think, going on there in that house. But you might understand it even if it is strange. On the flip side of that, though, you would have the Galactic Anti-Center in the 8th house, which deals with other people's resources, other people's values, deep soul merging, personal even psychology in general, psychological processing, generational inheritance. Perhaps there is blinding or not seeing things clearly in those areas, or in one of those areas. May not be all of them. It may just be, one of them. That's always possible. Seems like that might be possible. Might understand your own values really well, in a weird way, but understand them. have a weird relationship with them but understand them, versus on the flip side of that, you're blinded by other people's values, blinded by, or you don't see them clearly. Now let's say you've got the GC in the 3rd house. That might give you a different way of learning, of thinking, of communicating. Of your perception of things might be a little different too. Now, you might understand that these are different. You may have like a weird relationship with them, but you might understand that they're different. You might be able to see, I think of the 3rd house is more micro level, and then the 9th house is more macro level. So you might be able to see things in a more micro level way. But on the flip side of that, with the Galactic Anti-Center in the 9th, you might have difficulty seeing things in a more macro way. You might be blinded or can't see clearly understanding and assimilation. That seems possible. Beliefs. You might be blinded or something, blinded or can't see clearly beliefs. What gives meaning to your life, that kind of thing. Even things like spirituality, or not really, metaphysics, religion, that could also be blinded in some way. Okay, so then let's go to the 4th house, the Galactic Center in the 4th house. Now, the Galactic Center in the 4th house, I feel like these people like people with the Galactic Center in the 1st, people with Galactic Center in the 4th, because the 4th house is like the deepest, most conscious part, most consciously conscious house, essentially. It's private, but it's conscious. So it's deeply conscious. So I feel like people with the Galactic Center in the 4th probably also have a, like at their core, like who they are, they probably know that they're a little different. They're probably aware of this. They may not realize that it's the Galactic Center that does this, or that might play a role in doing this, but a little different. Their families might have been a little different. Things like that. They have a weird relationship with these things. Strange, different kind of relationship with these things. Now on the flip side of that, with the Galactic Anti-Center in the 10th, they may have some issues with, there may be some blinding or some lack of clarity with the public spheres of life, with career, with public presence, with reputation, social status, all of those things. There might be some blinding or some lack of clarity, being able to see clearly. I could see that being the case. Now, Galactic Center in the 5th house, I think of somebody who they might have an interesting relationship with risk-taking, with their hobbies, with their interests. Perhaps even an interesting relationship with dating, or with even their children. That seems possible too. Might be in tune with it, right? In tune with all of those things, but the relationship might just be different. A little different, or a little weird. Their creative self-expression, the way they creative, might also be a little weird or different. But in tune with it too. On the flip side of that, though, if you've got the Galactic Anti-Center in the 11th house, there might be like a blinding on how to make your goals obtainable. Perhaps being able to creatively express yourself and whatnot through your hobbies, through your interests, and maybe a blinding there to make something of them in terms of long-term goals, things like that. That seems possible. There might also be like a blinding or a lack of clarity with friends and groups. Not seeing those things clearly seems possible with the GC in the 11th. And even just not seeing your long-term goals clearly or being blinded in some way seems possible as well. Now, with the GC in the 6th house, my first thought is something having to do with health, something kind of weird or different. I mean, you might have somebody who like never gets sick to somebody who is sick all the time. I could see either of those, something like that being the case. I'm not saying that has to be the case, but that is kind of where my mind goes. Might have somebody that functions a little different in daily life. They function a little different at work or in the work that they do. All of those seem possible with the GC and the 6th. Galactic Anti-Center on the 12th. There might be a blinding, because, okay, like I do think of like the 6th house as both physical and mental health. The 12th house, though, is very unconscious. It's very, it's I would think of that as more the mental health, or more mental healthy. But I do think of the 6th house as this too. Perhaps if you've got the Galactic Anti-Center in the 12th, there's something going on with your unconscious. The unconscious is kind of blinding anyway, right? Like we don't, it's unconscious. But perhaps there's like a blinding or a lack of clarity. It might actually add even more of a lack of clarity to the unconscious. I could see that being the case. Perhaps a lack of clarity or a blinding to how we sabotage ourselves, or even to escape, things like that. I'm going to get going because this video got kind of long. I'll do the other ones next, houses 7 through 12. But these are just some ideas, just some things to play with. Oh, and I want to mention, if you have, I can't remember if I said this already, but like if you have, okay, I've talked about, at the very beginning, I was talking about the way the houses are set up. I would think also if you have like, if you got Sagittarius intercepted in your chart, it's probably also harder to feel the GC stuff. That would be my guess. I would think it might go that way. It would also depend on everything going on in your chart, but all of this would depend on everything going on in your chart. But these are just some ideas for how the GC might work, just kind of by house. Anyway, I'm gonna get going. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can find us at Let's Fuck With Astrology. I am at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Apaternal Astrology on Instagram. If you want to subscribe to us or whatever the fuck people do on Facebook, or not Facebook, YouTube. I don't know why I keep saying that. I need to create a fucking Facebook for this. Though I don't really want to, but I probably should because I keep saying it. If you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, you can find us on by searching for Let's Fuck With Astrology in the YouTube search bar. If you are, if you do the Reddit thing, come join us on the subreddit Let's Fuck With Astrology. And if you're interested in the star cards, go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. Okay, y'all. I'll see y'all later.